This program is intended for informational purposes only and does not contain medical advice. As always, please contact your physician or qualified healthcare provider with any questions regarding a medical condition. Hot and Bothered podcast. Welcome to another episode of Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to ask you guys a question. Have you ever just run through your to-do list or your list of accomplishments, and after it was all done, you thought you were going to feel this sense of pride and productiveness and joy, but you just felt meh? I call it ubiquitous melancholy, where it's like no matter what I do, nothing brings me joy. I have this overwhelming sense of just emptiness. Or maybe you go from task to task to task to task because you cannot deal with the sense of restlessness that comes when you actually stop doing something. Well, you might have something called HFD. It sounds serious, and it actually might be, but it's called high-functioning depression, and today's guest is going to talk all about it. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Judith Joseph, MD, a board-certified psychiatrist who is a researcher specializing in mental health and trauma. She is a highly sought-after speaker at prestigious institutions, but she is also a coveted on-air talent expert who has been on Good Morning America, CNN with Anderson Cooper, Oprah Daily, and most recently, the Mel Robbins podcast. She's the author of the future New York Times bestseller, High Functioning, Overcome Your Hidden Depression and Reclaim Your Joy. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Judith Joseph.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, we're going to post
We're
this stuff.
manifesting.
We're manifesting. Yes, you guys don't understand. This took a lot because this lady is busy. She is on a world tour promoting this book, and this just worked out. Very serendipitous.
Well, I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so glad that it worked out.
Thank you. Thank you. So I was first made aware of you by my girlfriend, Kiara Boone. She wrote a piece on this book by for Essence magazine, and completely unsolicited. She was like, sis, you have to buy this book. And I was just like, you know what? I think one of my friends, Dr. Charles, who is a mutual friend of ours, suggested that she come on the podcast. So I was like, okay, two people whose opinions that I respect so much both recommended that you come on the book. So I was like, let me just do a deep dive into who Dr. Judith Joseph was. And I was just like, okay, yes. And so we made the inquiry. There was interest. And this is one of the tent poles of Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. We really like to put a strong focus on mental health, especially for minorities. So before we jump into the book, because there's so much to cover there, I wanted to do a little bit of a backtrack to like your origin story, because it's just fascinating how people become the self-actualized version of themselves. But the origin story, like where are you from, and was psychiatry always like something that you aspired to be? Because that would be interesting for a little girl.
When I was a little girl, I didn't even know what a psychiatrist was.
Right.
And I was born in Trinidad, which is a little island off the coast of Venezuela in the Caribbean. So there's Trinidad and Tobago. And I actually grew up not far from here in New Jersey. And so my parents came here to make a better life for us, like many immigrant parents did. But it was interesting because I was enrolled in school back and forth in between the Caribbean and here. And when I was little, I knew I wanted to be a scientist. In fact, my dad still has these cassette tapes, because this was back in the day, of me saying, I want to be a scientist and a doctor when I grow up. And I did not know that that would actually happen, but I wanted it.
Manifesting,
right? And I ended up being the first in my family to graduate from college, and then, going to Duke for undergrad, then going to Columbia Medical School to become a doctor. At that time, I thought that I was going to be like a brain surgeon. That changed to, I like being in the OR, in the operating room, but I don't necessarily want to stand on top of people, cutting for like hours. But I did like using my hands, and I initially was an anesthesiologist, but I found myself kind of like blah, meh.
Really?
Yes.
Because anesthesiologists make a boatload of money. Like, if you didn't know who makes the money in the OR, it's the anesthesiologist, like, maybe possibly more than the surgeon.
No, it's true, and so, like, to get that prestigious spot at Columbia for anesthesia, it was like my parents were like, "Okay, you finally made it." But 2 years in, like, I remember I was under the operating room table, and this is a little gross, but, like, some pee fell on my face because like, you have to no one tells you this. You have to go under the table, open the Foley, pour out the pee, measure it to make sure that the ins are matching the outs because 'cause you're measuring their blood pressure and their volume,
Yeah, that's
and
not on
no,
Chicago Med.
yeah, I didn't
That's not in the
it's not
residence.
glamorous.
No, it's this we don't see that part.
I mean, doctors and nurses still do hook up, and there's some of that scandal, but no. I was like, "What am I doing with my life? I don't like the cold, and operating rooms are freezing."
Mhm.
I'm from the Caribbean, like, I'm a Trini girl. So I was like and it's lonely. I'm one of 4 kids, and I grew up with a big family, and surgeons don't talk to you. They're like they call you anesthesia. They say, "Table up, table down."
Really?
Wake up.
That's also something that is not really
No.
depicted because, I mean, I remember watching City of Angels and Meg Ryan was this, I think she was a brain, doctor and, she's playing like Red House by Jimi Hendrix. I was just like, "Oh, the OR is lit." No, not so much? Okay.
No, it is not. It really isn't, I wish. But, yeah, I found that I was not fulfilled. I was like, I did all this school, delayed all this happiness, and why am I not happy?
Mm.
So, my parents, when they found out I was leaving anesthesia, they were like, "Wait, okay, what are you gonna do?" And I said, "I'm gonna be a psychiatrist." And first they were like, "Why are you gonna go work with them crazy people?" That's what they said. And I was like, "They're not crazy." And, I really did like my rotation when I was a medical student and we went to South Africa and I was on this orphanage working with these little kids and they had lost their parents. And we did these trauma groups. And I tell you, of all of my med school years, that was like the most formative experience. I was doing these trauma groups with these little kids and they were looking at me, they were like, "I want to be a doctor too." And I was like, "I was really poor and I made it. You can too." And we were crying together. And I was like, that's what I want to do with my life. Like, I don't want to be in this operating room, even if it means making lots of money. I want to help people and connect with them and help them heal their trauma. And so I got lucky and I matched into a position at Columbia for psychiatry and never looked back.
Yeah, you basically answered like all my questions here. What was the turning point that led you to the field? You described that. But let me ask you this. It sounds like a really, benign question, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people don't know the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. So maybe you could tell us what the difference is.
Yeah, a psychiatrist has a medical degree, so I can write prescriptions. Um, Psychologists can't write prescriptions, but they're very, very trained in therapy. Psychiatrists are trained in therapy as well. So think a psychologist can do therapy, talk therapy, and all these different types of therapies, and a psychiatrist can do therapy and prescribe medications.
Yeah, have worked with a number of psychologists, and when the discussion came up about prescribing SSRIs, um, I was going to be referred to a psychiatrist. So, it's interesting because I most of my friends who are in therapy are in therapy with psychologists, not psychiatrists.
That's why I wrote this book because I want to make this information accessible.
Yeah.
I really want people to have the information that they would get if they were to go to see a psychiatrist.
Okay, so let's get to the book. I read as much as I could, and I love to read. I'm a voracious reader. But what I noticed that you describe in the book is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I want you to describe what your life was like personally and professionally pre-pandemic, and then how it changed during the pandemic.
Well, pre-pandemic, you would think that I had the perfect life. It was really difficult to open my own lab as a Black woman in New York City. I was told so many times that, oh, you would need to partner with a man, like you'd have to find an older white guy to partner with. I got told that point blank so many times.
Wow.
You can't do it on your own. Like, stay in academia longer and then you'll build a career. Maybe you'll be able to. But when I finally did it on my own, it was very scary. My parents are very conservative, so they're just like, stay in a nice hospital job. What you doing a business? And I'm like, listen, as a Black woman working for yourself, you have so much more freedom. You like, no one's telling you no all the time, right? You're the boss. I was just tired of having to prove myself. So when I started my own lab, it was hard. And because I grew up in these very prestigious institutions, going to college at Duke, going to med school at Columbia, business school at Columbia, it's like all the time I was told, you don't belong here. Like, you only got here because you're Black, although I had better grades than most people,
DEI,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you have this, at least I did, this imposter syndrome. Like, I don't belong. I have to work harder. And so I think my high functioning depression started very early on because, I'm constantly told I'm not good enough. So I have to work harder. So nothing is good enough. Like, the more I work, the higher you get. And the higher you get, the more people think you don't belong. So it's like a catch 22. And so right before the pandemic, on the outside, it looked perfect. I had a lab, I had a team, I had the perfect little family, little cute little kid, husband at the time. But then shit hit the fan,
It
with
hit the fan for a lot of
for
us during the
what?
pandemic. Yeah,
Yes.
pandemic was just, wow, rocked a lot of people's universe.
Mhm.
How did it affect you, though?
So I had these clinical studies that I was continuing because you can't just yank people out of studies. You have to do things safely, and the FDA said you have to continue. So there was a time when I was literally walking through Times Square to get to my lab, and it was a ghost town. It felt like out of The Walking Dead.
Mhm.
And, still having to carry on my studies. My partner at the time, he was a frontline worker, so he was dealing with a lot of death, and he's an anesthesiologist, a lot of death because anesthesiologists, they keep the airway open. And with COVID, the airway was closing. People were dying. So, and then I had the small child at home. All these people depended on me. Then I got added to this prestigious board at this Ivy League institution, and they're like, "You're doing so great. Can you talk to our, hospital and give us coping skills?" And I was like, "Okay." On the Zoom giving this talk, and halfway through the talk, I'm like, "I think I'm depressed." Like, it just hit me because I was getting these, questions from nurses, doctors, like, "What do I do? I can't go home. How do I cope?" You know, um, and yet I was like, "Wow, if this depression, hit me like this, if I was surprised, I wonder how many people
Mhm.
like me are surprised by when they realize they're depressed."
So I read about that part in the book where you had a light bulb moment that I think I'm depressed, but you didn't check all the boxes for clinical depression. So what are the differences between clinical depression and high functioning depression?
Well, in my lab with my research studies, you have to use this Bible of psychiatry called the DSM-5. So you go through a checklist and you have these symptoms of depression like low mood, poor sleep, can't focus, low energy, guilt, and then sometimes changes in your appetite, changes in like you may feel restless or fidgety. But at the very bottom, if you don't check the box for lack of functioning or significant functioning impaired or significant distress, then your doctor goes, okay, well, you don't have a condition. So bye. Come back when you're broken.
Kinda like menopause, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly like menopause. Like, just take an antidepressant, drink some tea, go stretch, go to a Pilates class. You'll be fine.
Or like everyone goes through it, right? I
Yeah.
think a lot of doctors I think they have high function depression. I think they don't have a lot of joy in their lives. They have something called anhedonia, which is a lack of pleasure and interest in things. You're like, meh, bleh. So if you walk into your doctor's office and you're like, I feel meh, bleh, and I have these symptoms of depression, but you're still functioning, they're going to be like, why are you here?
Yeah.
This is not an emergency. Come back when you're in crisis. And so I found that this was a problem in healthcare because when you look at what's happening with physical health, like longevity science, menopause, cancer, it's like, let's catch it before it starts. No one will tell you when you have stage 4 cancer, then come in. They'll say, no, prevent the cancer, eat foods that are healthy, not processed, right? Like go for your screenings, prevent the cancer, prevent the heart disease, prevent the osteoporosis with the menopause treatments. But no one's doing that for psychiatry. Where is this excitement? It's come back once you break down and you lose functioning or you're in crisis, then we'll help you.
Right, exactly, and when the pandemic hit, I was like, "Oh, we're gonna have a mental health crisis," and I was like, "We're also gonna have a domestic violence crisis." It was that was, like, some of the most terrifying things because, you have schools, you have mandatory reporters, and they're not gonna be in, like, children's lives and that sort of thing. It was a terrifying time just thinking about all of the, the variables and the possibilities. So you mentioned the lab that you started. It's called the Happiness Lab. And, well, I want you to tell me a little bit about the lab and the peer-reviewed research study that led you to the creation of the book.
Well, I love my lab. It's my baby. My daughter is my first baby. The lab is my second baby. And so I do a lot of fun research in the happiness lab, but in the lab that's the clinical research lab, I do a lot of research trying to develop new treatments for things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, ADHD, eating disorders, dementia, postpartum depression, and I do a lot of work with psychedelics, which is a new thing.
Mm.
So that lab is very by the book DSM-5 versus the happiness lab. I get to do the fun research. So, high functioning depression is not yet recognized. So I had to submit a protocol to, the IRB. I had to get informed consents, get people, enroll in the study, interview them, just trying to learn about what were the risk factors for high functioning depression. And I explain it this way. So high functioning depression, HFD, the high, if you think of you're in fight or flight, right? You're heightened. That's related to trauma. So high functioning depression is closely tied to unprocessed trauma. And the reason is because when you don't process your trauma, what happens is you cope by avoiding it. Now, classically, when you think of like a combat veteran, they avoid people, places, or situations that trigger them or remind them. But people with high functioning depression avoid their trauma by busying themselves, overworking, ignoring the trauma by overperforming. So the high functioning, the F in HFD, that's the people pleasing. So it's functioning, you're overdoing it, right? This is because likely related to the trauma. One of the symptoms of trauma is feeling as if you're not good enough, feeling self-blame or shame. So what do? You keep constantly trying to prove yourself, like I did, right? From the trauma of being, having those microaggressions, from my scarcity trauma when I was younger, and being in rooms where people were way more wealthy than I was, right? And then the D in HFD is depression. But instead of looking sad or weepy, people with HFD have anhedonia, which is the meh, the like not enjoying things. So
Mhm.
there was a time during 2020 where I was like getting all these studies, getting all these awards, and it was like numb. I felt like I wasn't even enjoying it, but I couldn't stop because I had already started coping by overfunctioning.
Let me find this card because I wanted you to talk more about anhedonia and also masochism, which are two of the symptoms of high functioning depression, correct?
Yes.
And inside of the book, there's there's tests that you can take for yourself, correct? Can you demonstrate any of them on me right now?
Yes.
Oh, well then let's go. Okay, let's find out if I have anhedonia.
So the people pleasing is what masochism is. So when you think masochism, most people think of like the sexual term, but
Yeah, like
and
BDSM.
right, yeah.
But
Which
we're
is
not talking about that right
nothing
now.
wrong with that, but that's not the same thing as what we're talking about here. The masochism in the DSM, the Bible Psychiatry, that was taken out in the 80s because it really has to do with masochistic personality traits. These are people who bend over backwards for others, who sabotage their own happiness and joy for the sake of others,
Mhm.
likely due to feelings of unworthiness. Think of doctors who work to the bone, double shift, don't eat, but they're just showing up for the hospital for the patients, right?
And it's just they just consider that part of being a doctor, part of being a resident. It's just that's what you sign up for when you say, "I'm going to be a doctor." That means double, triple shifts. That means no sleep. That's what that means rather than that's not normal.
Right. It's not even thinking about yourself. Or think of the single mom who takes care of everyone but herself, takes care of her parent, takes care of her grandparent, take care of her kids, showing up at work and overcompensating, right, due to a lack of unworthiness. So this is the anhedonia quiz. So I can administer some to
Go
you.
ahead.
Okay.
Let's try this out. Let's see how high functioning depressed I am.
So think of a time in your life when you were overperforming, overdoing, you were masking sadness. and answer these questions based on that.
Okay.
So at that time, did you make delayed future happiness statements instead of feeling gratitude in the moment? This is what that sounds like. When I get this job, then I will finally be happy. When I fall in love one day, then I will finally be happy.
No.
Okay. At that time, did you find it hard to feel fulfilled by resting or taking breaks because instead you felt restless and empty when you were not busy?
No.
Did you almost never take the time to save your meals? And this might be because you were multitasking, eating while working, mindlessly munching in front of the TV at night, scarfing down food in the evening because you forgot to eat all day.
No.
Did you seldom enjoy the curiosity of reading for leisure?
Yes.
When you took naps, did you wake up feeling tired instead of refreshed?
Yes.
When you watch TV or movies, are you doing something else or distracted from the program?
No.
When you make an effort to dress up, did you hardly ever luxuriate in the experience?
Yes.
When others complimented you, did you have a hard time feeling pride at the praise?
No.
Did you have a difficult time feeling connected to others during social interactions with friends or family members?
Yes.
Is it challenging for you to relax on vacations? This is at that time. Or on holidays?
No.
Did you find it difficult to enjoy your expertise with your favorite hobbies or activities?
Yes.
Did you find it hard to feel delight in listening to music?
No.
Did you have a difficult time enjoying sensuality during physical intimacy?
Yes.
Oh, you were in the moderate range for anhedonia during that period of time. So the reason that I chose those words is because all of those are sensations that make up happiness. So when people come to my private practice, they say, Dr. Judith, I just want to be happy. But when they come to my research practice,
They understand that happiness is elusive.
there's no such thing
There's
as
no
happy.
destination.
There's nothing on the research scales that says it.
Right.
What we're looking for are these points of joy. So a point of joy in the research is when you're thirsty, did you feel quenched? When you took a nap, did you feel rested? When you were lonely, did you feel connected when you were with others? When you were hungry, did you savor the meal? Those are the points of joy in the research world that add up to what people outside of research think happiness is. The problem is that the framing has to be different. People on the outside of research think happiness is this thing. Like, when I get a job, I'll be happy. When I lose the weight, I'll be happy. It's an idea or an ideal versus joy is the experience in the moment, you know?
Yeah, I realized my mother passed away in the pandemic, and I realized, in the days leading up, we had a lot of conversations, and I realized that my mom had joy in her life and I lacked it. And my mom's life was so simple in comparison to mine. I mean, I'm on private jets, I'm doing all this stuff, I'm walking red carpets, I'm miserable. Miserable. And my mom's doing aquafit and she's got a library card and she has a book club and everything is just so simple, and she had more joy in her life than I did, and I realized how arrogant I was to think that my life in some way, shape, or form was better than hers because of all of these achievements or whatever. But I was so sad she actually surpassed me because that is the goal. The goal is joy. And if we were to think about happiness as a constant, I feel like it would burn us out. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that as human beings, and you can tell me, I don't think as human beings we're equipped to handle a constant state of emotion. We need the abysmal lows to really enjoy those euphoric highs. Would you say?
We do. We don't know what happiness is without the sadness. And when you do experiments with animals and you try to stimulate what happiness is or dopamine constantly, they're not happy. It causes a lot of distress. So we're not meant to always be on a high. And when people tell us or society tells us that happiness is things and images of excellence, right? Like getting on jets and having things and being beautiful, all these like superficial things, then it's distracting us from the actual sensation, right? Because if you're so busy running here and there, You're not sitting and eating your meal. You're not taking the time to taste the cheese in your lasagna. You're like, and off, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a stomach upset and then you feel miserable. All of those are taking away from your joy. And one of the things people are often surprised at in the research is that one of the points of joy is actually not being stressed. So, one of the questions that's asked is about tension and about anxiety. And people think, but isn't that anxiety and not depression? No, they're very connected, right? And so, if you are stressed, then that's a point of joy that's being taken out. It's very difficult to feel joyful when you're stressed. So, if you're hopping from country to country, doing project to project, you're so stressed, you're not even tapping into the basic human joy.
Mm. In the book, you list the 5 V's: validation, venting, values, vitals, and vision. Talk about the 5 V's.
I use 5 because most of us have 5 fingers, and it's okay if you don't. Um, but I always, my dad's a pastor, so I use a lot of mirrors and imagery and things like that. And when I think of your hand, I always think of like joy is built into our DNA. We're born to have joy, but many of us have lost touch of it. So like, I want people to be able to grasp the joy back to them, and using the 5 V's they can. So the first one is validation. If you don't validate how you feel, the good or the bad, you will be very confused and very afraid. The human brain doesn't like uncertainty. So imagine if you were in a room and the light was off and this loud thud fell, right? You would probably be swinging or running. You don't know what it is.
Right.
But you turn the light on and you see that, oh, like it was a picture frame. You're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna put it back up. That's how we are when we don't know our emotions. If we don't know how we feel, we're afraid and anxious. The uncertainty is too much for us. That's why naming your emotions is so important. It sounds like so granola-y and loosey-goosey, but it's
No,
scientifically
it's
based.
I've had many therapists and also girlfriends tell me that their therapists encourage them to name their depression, or name their emotions, because it's like your emotions are not you. Your depression is not you. It is not an identifier as to who you are. It's just something that you are experiencing at that moment. So it allows you to create a distance between you and, intrusive thoughts, bad emotions, and such as depression.
Yeah, and also like when you name the emotion, it allows you to think about what you want to do better and how to change your behaviors. For example, a lot of the men that I work with, they'll come in and say, like, I have anger issues. But when we're actually getting down to more complex naming of emotions, because maybe they were only taught by their dad, anger or sadness, like they weren't anxiety was never a term that was used. Worry was never used. So when we find out that actually it's a worry, you come home and you yell at your wife and kids because you're worried about paying the bills.
Yeah.
Then when they realize it's worry.
Hey guys, I have like just a small idea. Watch the movie Inside Out and Inside Out 2. It'll really allow you to understand all the emotions that you've got inside of you, not just anger. Okay, go ahead.
That's one of my daughter's favorite movies.
It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite movies. I love that
I
movie.
cry every time.
So do I. So do I. It's such a good movie.
But yeah, if you're able to name it, then you're like, okay, I was actually worried. But let me think about why I was so worried, because then I can pick the strategy that I want to address versus you confuse worry for anger and then you just lash out and start yelling and then you feel guilty and then it's a vicious cycle. So naming is so important.
You talk about keeping score, not just in certain relationships or situations, but also keeping score with ourselves, like the relationship that we have with ourselves. And I think that some people might have a difficult time conceptualizing the relationship that we have with ourselves. Like, we have relationships with time, we have relationships with money, but a lot of people don't really recognize that. But if you think about it, it is if you think about the way you relate to time, and if you're a hedonist and just really like to live in the moment, or if you're like a nostalgic, you really like to live in the past, or, just your style with handling money, there's relationships with this that can be altered for the better or for the worse. But you talk about keeping score with in relation to the relationship you have with yourself? Talk more about that.
Yeah, that's the self-validating. So accepting and identifying what's happening within you is a part of your relationship. But if you weren't taught to do that, if no one mirrored that for you, then you go through life basically ignoring and invalidating yourself. I recently was at this women's conference and there were like 300 women there, and I asked them, like, how many of you sit through your meetings and you know you really have to pee, but you just sit there and then you're running to the bathroom at the end of the day? They were laughing. They were all laughing. Then I asked, like, how many of you have like gone through a day without really eating and you were so hungry that you just kind of invalidated yourself and said, I'll eat later. Everyone else is doing it. But just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean you should be doing it, right? So you invalidate yourself when you don't listen to your body, when you don't acknowledge that you are a human being, not a human doing. And then the second part, the second B, is venting, expressing how you feel. And in the happiness lab, we usually have a demonstration with a balloon, and then we try to push it underwater. Like a fully blown balloon, if you try to push it on the water, it'll pop right back up. And it's a nice visual because when you don't express your emotions and you don't let it out, it will pop up in places that you don't want it to,
Trust me,
right?
I know. Trust me, I know. I've been accused of being passive aggressive more times than I can count within this last month. But keep going.
Right, or you snap, right? And then you feel guilty, like, "Oh, I shouldn't have snapped." But had you started, like, letting out some of that air from that balloon or expressing the feelings over time, it wouldn't have been so tense, right? And it wouldn't have popped out when you couldn't control it. So expressing your emotions can be different, and I give different tools in the book. Some people, they're not very verbal, especially if they're neurodivergent, so they may wanna, express their emotions by writing in a journal. Others, they are more spiritually based, they wanna pray. For some, crying. Little kids do this a lot, and so all of these are healthy ways of expressing. With the artists that I treat, dancing, singing, wearing, how you feel if you're in fashion, there's no wrong way.
Mhm.
However, there are do's and don'ts. So if you're gonna vent to someone, you don't wanna trauma dump, right? You wanna ask for emotional consent. So you wanna say, "Hey,"
Yes. I love that term. It's emotional consent. Whenever me and my girlfriends would be talking and one of us, is going through something, do you have the bandwidth?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. It's very simple so that you don't turn into that friend who is regarded as, oh my God, I don't want to pick up the phone because she's just going to be like bitching and complaining and whining. And you don't want to be that friend. But then you also don't want to be the strong friend that nobody checks in with. So we're going to get to that in a second, but continue on with the 5 V's.
Yeah, we all have the friend who we know they're talking and we put it on speaker and we're like, "Uh-huh."
Yeah, yeah, girl. And we're washing dishes, we're vacuuming. No way.
But you know what? It's not healthy for them either because a lot of the research shows that if you're just venting for the sake of venting and you don't have a clear intention, you don't ask emotional consent, and you're not getting proper feedback, then actually it makes you feel worse. And the studies actually liken it to pouring gas on a fire.
Oh,
That's
wow.
how dangerous venting can be when you're not doing it in a way that's beneficial. Also, you don't want to vent onto people who are of a lower position than you. So let's say it's your employee. I mean, they're not going to be like, "Oh, I don't want to talk to you." They're going to listen because you pay them.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a power dynamic.
Yes.
It's an abuse of a power dynamic.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that gets messy.
Or to your kid. I treat a lot of children and adolescents as well as adults. You don't want to vent to your kids. A lot of the kids will say, I want, mommy and daddy to talk to me and I feel close when they do, but sometimes it stresses me, right? So your kid will look like they're like listening and enjoying because they want to be close, but you
And they
could
wanna
actually,
please you.
yes, you could be
Mhm.
stressing them out or
Yes.
causing some trauma unknowingly.
And hence the people pleasing, tendency starts right there.
Exactly.
The trauma starts right there with the most, the most benign intentions.
Yeah, and don't feel bad if you've done this, right? No one's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. But when you're aware that you're doing this, you can always become better, right? You can always reparent. So if you're someone who's done this, like, it's all right, like just moving forward, you want to be mindful of that. And then the values is the third V. And these are the things that I say don't have price tags. They're priceless. So in my lab, I do this demonstration where people hold a rock and they write on the rock what it is that anchors them in life. What are the things that at the end of the day, if you had 5 minutes left on earth, you would want to do?
So like a core value?
These are, yeah, like you're thinking about like Inside Out again,
No,
right?
no,
Like the core
no,
memories.
you wanna know what? Is this keeps coming up in conversations that I've been having recently, and, one of my girlfriends she's a pathfinder, so she helps companies and corporations and people discover what their core values are, and also Venus is in retrograde, and this is where you're assessing your values. It's crazy. So this has just been a topic of conversation before I even found out about the retrograde, where discovering like I'm on this journey of discovering core values because most people think what a core value would be is just a sensation and not like an intrinsic foundational value that is like creates the scaffolding of you.
That gives your life meaning and purpose,
Right.
really. For me, you know, at points in my career, I valued education. But when I think about it, because I was collecting all these degrees and it was like, wait a second. The thing that really brought me purpose when I first started learning was curiosity. And that was what lit me up, not just collecting the accolades. So I started reading again for fun. At some point along the way, I was reading journal articles for the research and learning protocols, but that was just like reading to like download my brain with information. But then I started reading for pleasure, for fun. I read Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and I was like, oh my gosh, reading is fun again. So you have to figure out what those things are for you, what those values are for you. And many times people come to me and they're like, well, I don't remember what I value, Dr. Judith. And I say, well, sometimes you don't have a good memory because of trauma. One of the symptoms, one of the 30 symptoms of trauma is forgetting. Your brain,
Disassociation.
yes, and your
Yeah.
and your brain forgets. So you sometimes forget whole parts of your life. And you need to work with someone to feel grounded, to tap back into those memories again. And then you find your values again. There are a whole host of exercises in my book to talk about how to tap into values if you don't remember them. But it's possible to find your way back to them. And then the fourth V is vitals. You only get one body and brain. How do you take care of them?
Amen and hallelujah. This is another one of the tent poles of Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. I stress to especially the men who watch this show. I need you guys to get more proactive about your health, especially as you hit 40 and up. I need you guys to stay in the gym and monitor your diet and get your screenings and go to therapy because we're not rehabilitation centers. So yeah, and then with women, we are usually very proactive about our health, but, for the most part.
Right. We are.
Right after we take care of the kids and the husband, usually, yeah.
Yes, yes. But yeah, all those things that you said are important because you do have to get good sleep, movement, diet, eating things that are not processed because that's not good for your brain. It causes inflammation and that makes you sad. But other things that are non-traditional vitals in the book are things like your relationship with technology and your relationship with people. The relationships with other people in your life is the number one predictor of your longevity, which I think most people don't know. So if you knew that, you wouldn't be staying with someone who's literally sucking your life force away, right? And then the last vital is your work-life balance because people who have high functioning depression have a hard time with that.
I feel like in this day and age, it's really hard to find a work-life balance just because of, everybody's circumstances right now. It's just it's tough. It's tough. It feels like, it almost feels like therapy for a lot of people is a luxury. You talk about like democratizing mental health, and I just wonder what your plan would be because it is so at times cost prohibitive,
Hmm. Yeah.
so it does appear that it's a luxury, but it shouldn't be. It is a necessity for all of us.
Well, that's why I wrote this book because in the fifth V, vision, planning your joy, I talk about how you use the tools to then implement some of the practices that you want for the future. And the motto of my lab is understand the science of your happiness. So there will only ever be one Melyssa in the future of the universe and in the history of the universe. Only one Judith ever. there's only one of us. So we have to understand the science of what makes us unhappy in order to understand the science of our happiness. And so with using the tools, you can look at yourself. Let's say you're a woman in your 40s and you're going through perimenopause. That's one of your biological, that's me as well. That's one of your biological risk factors. But let's look at the biopsychosocial, you know, in terms of your own psychology. Your past trauma is going to be different than my past trauma. Understand the science of your happiness. Social wise, I live in a city, other people live in rural areas. I have several businesses, other people may live on a farm or whatever it is. Your social factors are really important. I don't really drink that much alcohol, but others may drink more. You know, all of those biopsychosocial factors are the science of your happiness. But there are also things in there that take away from your happiness. So using the tools, you can start to prevent a breakdown before it happens.
So, in reading your book, you mentioned Chelsie Kryst,
Mhm.
which is such a devastatingly tragic story. She was Miss USA in 2019. She had a Juris Doctor and an MBA from Wake Forest University. She worked in civil litigation as an attorney, pro bono work to help reform the U.S. justice system. She was a correspondent for Extra. She earned 2 Daytime Emmy nominations. She founded White Collar Glam. She was so accomplished from a young girl, just being the head of the track team and all of these accomplishments. She was stunningly gorgeous. And then in January of 2022, she takes her own life by jumping off of a high-rise building. And it just was shocking to so many people. And I remember seeing a lot of the comments related to her looks, like she was too beautiful to have done that to herself, or she was too accomplished to have done that to herself. Like, they everybody pointed out all of this superficial aspects of her life and just that laundry list of accomplishments, rather than understanding that somebody that looks like that um, can actually be, you know, experiencing the depths of despair. So I believe that it was her own mom who described her as having high functioning depression. But her mother talks about the fact that she attempted suicide when she was in law school. So how does this how is it that she was not diagnosed with clinical depression, and it seems more that she was experiencing high functioning depression?
Well, depression is a spectrum. So you can go from low, it's not called low functioning clinical depression, but it's when you've lost functioning to high functioning. So, like in my book, I talk about how people with high functioning depression can go into low functioning or like clinical depression,
Mhm.
or they may cope by, using substances, or their body physically breaks down because of the stress. There are multiple things that can happen if you continue down this path. And April Simpkins, Chesley's mom, is a friend of mine, and in her book, she talks about how Chesley's reign was longer than any other person's reign, right? Because of the pandemic, hers got extended.
Oh, in terms of being Miss USA.
Right.
Right. Okay, and there's a lot of responsibilities that come with Miss USA. It's not just the sash and the crown. You have to do a lot of work representing the crown.
Yeah, but it's not just that. In her book, because Chesley wrote part of her book, she talks about the microaggressions and like the stress of being a Black woman and being perfect. And so, I think there were a lot of things that you can pull from, my research, and if you relate them to Chesley's life.
I wanted to actually read one thing that she said because this was really impactful. She said, "Each time I say I'm turning 30, I cringe a little," she wrote. "Sometimes can successfully mask this uncomfortable response with excitement. Other times, my enthusiasm feels hollow, like bad acting. Society has never been kind to those growing old, especially women." She goes on to say, "I discovered that the world's most important question, especially when asked repeatedly and answered frankly, is why? Why earn more achievements just to collect another win? Why pursue another plaque or medal or line item on my resume if it's for vanity's sake rather than out of passion? Why work so hard to capture the dreams I've been taught by society to want when I continue to find only emptiness? It's almost like this is literally your book.
Yeah, it's the delaying happiness, collecting things, over-functioning and having anhedonia, And, when you look at her, I think a lot of Black women feel like that. You walk into these rooms and you see the one Black woman there and you knew she, like, fought to get there and to stay there, and that if she were to say, "I'm tired," or "I'm burnt out," or "I'm
She feels like she's
depressed,"
replaceable
she is replaceable, and
because we're only allowed one of us
one
at
of
a
us,
time. Mhm.
no one will support her, they'll blame her. Maybe it's something you're doing, not the fact that you're probably better more competent than anyone else there. And also there's this weight of like, you gotta like do it for your community, right? Like you cannot fail. Although it's not failure, because if you walk away from a bad situation that's not for you, that's literally sucking the life out of you, that is actually a win. So I want people to read this book and reframe their idea of success, because if you're not having joy in your life, right? I talk about the basic DNA. If you're not deriving joy every day, then that's what life is about, right? Not to say that you just wanna be happy all the time and, like, engaging in things that are unhealthy for you, but if you're working so hard and there's no joy, don't ignore it. Just because you're not crying or in distress doesn't mean it's something you should ignore. It's likely anhedonia, and it's a red flag that you may have something else happening, and it could be high functioning depression.
So I told you earlier that Kara Boone, who wrote the article about high functioning depression, and you for Essence magazine, she was just like, "Oh, you have to read this." The article highlights a significant portion of the people suffering from HFD are Black women. While this may seem obvious, can you expand on some subtleties that we might not be aware of?
Well, since the study that I did is the first and only study in high functioning depression in the world, so we need to have more research. But what we do know from depression is that women are twice as likely to have anxiety and depression than men, twice as likely. I don't think a lot of people know that. And
Seems that tracks.
yes, but no one's surprised. Um, and Black women tend to have more PTSD. So like when you think about high function depression and trauma, and the trauma that triggers you to overperform, to not be good enough, or to not feel good enough, it makes sense,
Do you think that some of that is shaped by like our cultural identities, though?
definitely. And that's why the biopsychosocial model in my book helps you to understand the science of your happiness. So, a Black woman who is a professional, let's look at her biology. Biologically, she's going to be more at risk for perimenopause and menopause sooner, longer, and more severe, right? Biologically, she's going to be more at risk for traumas related to giving birth, right? Psychologically, she's going to be more at risk for postpartum depression. Psychologically, she's more at risk for traumas. Socially, she's more at risk for microaggressions in her environment. She's more at risk for having lower access to a lot of things that improve happiness, such as nature, good foods, like just healthy environments altogether. So when you look at the biopsychosocial, that really is the science of an individual's happiness. Versus, let's say, a man, right? Let's say a white man, biologically, he's going to have different biological risk factors. He may have conditions that he's at risk for given his history, family history, and so forth. Psychologically, he probably has other traumas or other issues, that are different than a Black woman. Higher rate of actually completing suicide. Socially, he's going to have different things in his environment. He's going to have more advantages, but he may have other things such as, higher rates of substance use and so forth. So everyone has a biopsychosocial, but everyone's biopsychosocial is going to have different components to it. And that's why I want people to understand their own science.
Mhm.
Because if you don't know the science of what's making you unhappy, how can you know the science of your happiness?
We talk a lot about the strong friend, the one that everybody leans on, but nobody ever thinks, that that they're they're breakable or they're fragile in any way, shape, or form, or that they need help. Um, what advice can you give to the person who thinks that they have to be the strong friend all the time and that their needs are not met, or they might fear vulnerability and look at it as a weakness.
I want people who are the strong friends, the rock, to consider what happened in the past, what trauma led you to feel like you were not worthy of care. What are you running from? If you're sitting still, do you feel restless? When you're not working or busy, do you feel empty? That could be because you're constantly going. You're constantly running from something that's not processed. So I want you to challenge that and sit still. And when you sit still, you may tap into something that you've forgotten or you've been trying to avoid. You may cry, and that's okay because you're starting to feel again. And then when you start to feel that pain, you are also giving yourself the capacity to start feeling joy, right? We talked about how it's hard to be happy if you don't know unhappiness. So when you tap into those emotions and you start feeling again, you'll also start to tap into the capacity for joy.
Mm. You dedicated your book to your daughter Zara. I want to talk about the ways that we might unintentionally traumatize children, particularly girls.
How you mirror love and relationships and communication to your child is what they pick up on. For example, let's say you're a father and you dote on your daughter and you use words like, you're so kind and you're so talented and your
You is
daddy's,
smart.
yeah,
You is important, Rick.
all these things with your daughter. But you're not conscious of this, or maybe you are conscious of this with your son. You don't use those words. You're like, all right, little man, you got this. And so you may not be aware that you're projecting this onto your child because maybe that's what you were taught, or maybe there's this inner fear of you not preparing your child for the world, which is a reality for Black fathers and Black boys, because you don't want your kid to be perceived as soft and then run into the world and have problems and not be able to defend themselves, right?
That's a
So there's a lot of
conundrum.
there's a lot of trauma within our community. There's this cultural people pleasing, or in my book I refer to as masochism, where girls are expected to to provide, to be patient, to
To
be great,
nurture.
gracious, to sacrifice their own happiness for the family, like to not be boastful, to not seem confident, to be all these things. Whereas their brother doesn't have the same,
Nope.
type
Boys will
of
be boys.
responsibilities.
There's all these
Correct.
adages for just permissibility to do basically whatever they want.
Right. And then when you do that with your child, again, think biopsychosocial, you're creating a social environment where there's more stress and responsibility for a girl and more permission and a grace for a boy to do whatever they want. So that in itself creates pressure on the system. And so when you are raising a child, again, we're all guilty of this. We all have our inherent biases, but just be aware of that. Think about what you were raised as, like how you were raised. For me, I was raised in a very religious household. I had it was three girls and one boy, and the boy definitely got to do more than the girls, right? So I'm aware now as to how that comes into play with my daughter, and I have to constantly remind myself. And I think that for parents, just be aware of how you were raised and your attachment style and what you were taught and how that is being, carried out in your own relationship with your child. Awareness, again, remember that's the validation, the acknowledgement. That's the first step. And then when you know that, then it'll inform the way that you raise your child, hopefully.
Mm. Okay. Well, Dr. Judith, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much. But before you go, we always do something called rapid fire. We're doing rapid fire. Okay. Number one, therapy or meditation?
Therapy,
Gratitude, journaling, or affirmations?
gratitude.
Quick power nap or long night sleep?
That's a hard one. Quick power nap.
Writing a book or giving a TED Talk?
TED Talk.
Yoga or Pilates?
Pilates.
Early morning workout or evening wind down?
Early morning for sure.
Same,
Yeah.
6:45, TBT. That's right. Dr. Judith, thank you so much for joining us. And for all of you, you must pick up High Functioning, Overcome Your Hidden Depression, Reclaim Your Joy, because I think that everybody in this room has assessed that they are high functioning depressed. So I think this book will benefit you, everybody in this room, myself included. Dr. Joseph, thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you so much for having
Of
me.
course. And thank you guys for joining me on another episode of Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. Take care.
Thank you for tuning into Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford. Please rate, subscribe, and comment, and share wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
This season of Hot and Bothered with Melyssa Ford is hosted, written, and executive produced by me for Forged Path Productions. This episode was written and produced by Sebastian Godin. Filming and editing of this episode is done by GVI Films and executive produced by Rachel DeSalvo.